Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be taking a look at understanding presets. So we're at a point now where we can do sound design with Monark. We understand what the controls do. We've taken a look at things under different circumstances. So now we can begin to understand how things work. And one of the best ways to do this is by looking at presets and understanding just what knobs are on and what the effects of having those knobs are doing. Like, what we can look at a preset and say, oh, this is probably what's happening, what's going on. So for example, here I've got my favorite one, that this is my favorite sound in Monark. It's this one. It's the really basic one. Something about it I just really like. I would make one modification. Let's just change this up to be a little bit shorter. And then that way when I move my cutoff, I can get a really tight sound, and I also would take away the leakage. But that's a preference. That's so cool. I'd maybe not completely get rid of the leakage, but get rid of a good chunk of it. So now let's take a look at, what's going on here? Well, we notice that we have two oscillators going out, and for whatever reason, the person who designed this patch chose to do oscillators 2 and 3. We notice that they are using the release envelope on both the filter and the decay. And a big part of this sound is the filter envelope. So we see that the filter is turning off over time. So as I get down shorter, it is getting way more plucky. And because it's adding value, but it's doing it through the decay knob, it's going to be removing the sound, but in a way that it's going to start at the top and then just decay right away. So it adds this value and then decays right away, giving us the plex sound. And that's also given to us by the dominion of the contour knob that we talked about. And that's that. In the background, I changed a couple behaviors. Like, for example, last note on, I believe it was on low and no on off, or maybe even never. I can't remember, but I always have to come back in here and check it once I find a sound I really like, usually. And then everything else is pretty much, I left that alone, didn't really touch any of that. And that's like the basis of the sound. Now, if I want to augment it, maybe I want to say, hey, I wonder what this would sound like with some pretty heavy feedback. But this is a sound that, to get the fullness of it, I kind of have to be moving this guy around to really let the listener experience what this sound is about, you know? Yep. So that's that sound in a nutshell. And we could go ahead and be like, hey, let's turn on the load, make it a little bit brighter. And we could even go ahead, I'd do B feedback on this one. If we take away those two moves alone, this is what we had. So you see how it's just a lot less bright. And because we understand what these processes are doing, we can make pretty dynamic moves on our sound. Okay, so that's just the first one. Let's just do a couple more. There's one in here I really like. In the House is pretty cool. So this sound is based on the idea of a ratio, right? I'm playing notes that are a little low for this patch. So you've probably heard this in like 100 different tracks. And the way this works is 100. That's probably a big understatement. But anyways, the way this works is you have your oscillators coming out. We notice we're using all three. And we basically set up a relationship between the frequencies of them. So we notice they're tuned to particular intervals. And you have to sort of tune as you go for this sort of a sound. And they're in different octaves. This contributes to it. The main housiness of it, if we got rid of these, like, it's still there, but you really need this one to fill in the sound. If we got rid of this one, the sound would still be there for the most part. So it'd be kind of cool to, mix this in. And then again, we have our filtering. We see they're using a similar contour setting. Maybe they use this as maybe they use this one as a jumping point for this one. Sometimes I'll do that in my patch creation. And we notice that they've hooked up the modulation to the frequency knob. So we could go ahead and, they've given us some rather atonal options here. Imagine just slapping a little bit of reverb on that. Oh man, it sounds so good. And we understand the basic principles. Like, this is one of the fastest ways to learn sound design, is just peel apart patches and be like, oh, what made this sound this sound, you know? There's another one in here that follows a similar thing. I think it's the neon piano. You see, it sounds like that's like so close to the other sound. Like, what did they just, it sounds like they just changed the envelope a little bit, and that was like it. Oh, and they've got some key tracking on with the filter. So the filter movement they had, they weren't completely pleased with. We notice our mix is on oscillator. Now, if you want to see some weird sound design, you got to go into the effects area. That's where like weird crap. You notice here our resonance is all the way up. That means they're going to be using self-oscillation in the filter. So if we were to hit a note, I'm going to be a little careful because sometimes these are freaking loud. Yep. And they have a long decay time on this one. See, it's just, yeah, okay, great. Good for them. Long decay time. So, but they're not able to like identify the knob that's probably the suspect and turn that down because as you saw, you want to be a little careful with some of these. But the presets in here are really well done. Like there's just tons and tons and tons of sounds in here. And I find this is one of the synths that I like to go through and just find sounds that I already enjoy. If I do go to the default patch, I usually like to make driving sounds or cool pluck filtered sounds. But I like to sometimes start with one. The patches don't usually get too dense. When they start throwing in feedback loops and filter resonance combined with the envelope, that's kind of those are like the more complicated ones, and you can generally take those apart pretty easily if you just take the time to think about what the various components do and how they're doing it. But anyways, this is just, I just thought it'd be cool to show you guys how I sort of break down presets. I mean, once you understand what everything does, it's not too hard to understand. I definitely like going through the classic one the most. The basses are pretty cool. I mean, most of the sound on here is cool. You notice they brought up the resonance on this one, and they have a negative filter contour, which is sort of an interesting move. It's also curious to see when they set the settings different. Like the trigger is on never, and every now and then you'll come across sounds, usually in the classic library, which are trying to emulate famous patches. So they'll be set to probably very similar priorities. Like on some of them, they have the note priority on low, which I always find an interesting thing. I'm like, I don't know why you'd want to switch to low. I always end up changing it back to last, but that's what they have theirs on. And you notice that when they were making this patch, they probably started on the default octave, maybe not, but they tuned it up an octave. And we see that they did use the modulation tabs, which that affects the way the LFO part of it's going to be used. So those are some interesting things there that they did. It's like, oh, that's kind of a curious move. So when we see that our noise is on, so if you listen in the background, it's not on by a lot, but it's there. So those are just like subtleties. They're trying to be, create an ambiance with it. Those sorts of things. It's just cute. It's kind of cool to see into the mind of who made this. So that's it. Yeah, go through another here. On the effects, let's go through another effect one. Those are always just such curious ones. I'm willing to bet Siren uses some form of self-oscillation. Oh, it doesn't. Wow, okay. We've got, okay, we went with the frequency modulation route. That's fine. Cool. So I mean, these things don't often get too crazy. They're using B, which is an interesting move because they have the resonance turned up. They have this turned up. This is a bit stronger than this. And we saw in the feedback video that B does this like weird pitch bend thing. So I think that using B for this sort of sound makes a lot of sense. So I don't know, just trying to draw conclusions about stuff, If we come in here, let's go to another one and say that we got our resonance cranked up, but it looks like it's a little ways under the self-oscillation, but we don't know. Oh, this is a cool sound. It's based on the feedback, and B, now we know that B is not gonna generate a tone by itself there. Or it may. It seems like it's pretty close to where that value would be. We have all three turned on, and we have our modulation. So the sound that we're getting is I was going to say square wave, and I was like, wait a second, that's oscillator 2. We see on oscillator 3 that we have a inverted triangle wave that's responsible for the clicking that we're getting. And it's also been linked up to the cutoff knob, which is kind of cool in combination. So we get similar things if we just turn one off. Kind of cool. So this is very based around the modulation. Let's take that away. See what we have. We still have clicking. Oh, that's because they sent out oscillator 3. That's an interesting idea. We could sort of just peel it back and sort of see the layers they went through. Anyways, these are just some curious things. Just trying to point out sound design concepts, show you, this is the process. And if you're just making a bunch of patches while you're sitting here, you're going to end up making weird stuff. Like you just will. I guarantee it. You'll come across weird things and cool things as you go. So I encourage you to create a snapshot bank. Go ahead and make one. I have one on my other computer that I made just for fun. And it was really cool. It was like whatever, just messed around and made a bunch of patches because I had some extra time. But if I'm working in a track and stuff, it is so helpful to come in here and just know what stuff does and be able to peel things back and see how the patch works. If you have any questions about this, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.